Liburd.
Madam President, I rise to give my support to the bill before this Honorable House, the Nevis Appropriations 2024 Ordinance 2023. Let me say a pleasant good day to all. I think it's still morning. We're getting a little bit of the last few minutes of the morning. So a pleasant good morning to you, Madam President, to all of the members on this side, the members in the gallery, the clerk, Sergeant at Arms, member opposite. Happy that the member opposite has come in. Madam President, I want to wholeheartedly support the bill as presented by the mover, the Honorable Premier, and the Minister of Finance. And I want to congratulate the mover of the bill on a superb delivery on Tuesday. Madam President, the bill seeks to provide sums in the amount of $282,706,900 for the functioning of the Nevis Island Administration for 2024. Of that sum, just about $200 million is recurrent expenditure. That's to deal with all the payment of salaries and those type of things that occur regularly. And just about 74 million is intended to go towards capital expenditure. Madam President, over the past years, I think we have come a long way in Nevis. I remember when I came to the Honorable House the first time, just about 10 years ago or so, the budget we didn't reach the $280 million. That means that we have continued to grow the economy. The economy in Nevis has grown steadily under the hand of the concerned citizens movement, Madam President. Off the bat, worthy of note, and I think I'll probably say it a couple of times, but worthy of note in this budget is that the public servants on Nevis will receive the final tranche of what is a 15% salary increase over the last 3 years, Madam President. And 15%, if you look at the other countries in the region, nobody else is approaching a 15% salary increase. But that 15%, Madam President, is only over the past 2 years, because if you go back a bit further, for those of us who have been following running of government in Nevis and in the Federation for a little while longer, if you go back a bit further to about, say, 2013, you would realize that back then we had another 10% increase in salaries. I think it was given, how was it, 4% one year, 3% the next year, and then 3% the following year. And Madam President, the increase is compounded. So while we say 4, 3, and 3, it's actually 4, then 3 point a little bit, because it's 3 on top of the 4 that you got before, and then another 3 again, so it's another 3 point something again. So that would have come closer to 11% than 10% actually. But let's stick with the straight numbers so that it's easier to understand. So from 2013 until now, public servants in Nevis, all told together, have had about a 25% increase in salary. And I think it's important to point that out at the onset. 25% increase in salary under a CCM-led Nevis Island administration.
Yes.
Madam President, the people of Nevis, Madam President, I think that people of Nevis can be very confident, and the people of Nevis can feel good to know that we have a government that cares. We have good, solid leadership, that there can be hope for a bright future for our children, Madam President, under the leadership of a concerned citizens movement-led government. Madam President, before I go any further, before I get too deep into what I really want to say, let me at the onset say a big, heartfelt thank you to Mr. Kevin Barrett, who is the former permanent secretary in the ministry that I lead, Ministry of Education, Sports, et al., long ministry. And Mr. Barrett is now heading up the Ministry of Human Resources. And I want to say thank you to Mr. Barrett. He has worked hard over the years. He has really been there. He has made things easy for me because he's somebody who is very, very efficient, very dedicated, very kind-hearted, somebody who really understands leadership and leads with a gentle hand. So I want to wish him all the very best as he takes up his new role as permanent secretary in Human Resources. So wherever you are, Mr. Barrett, thank you. Equally, I want to congratulate Ms. Zanella Claxton, who now takes up the role as permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education, et al. Madam President, Ms. Claxton, by any measure, is a remarkable young leader. She's a champion of excellence and is a true embodiment of the civil servant spirit. And I want to commend her for the hard work that she has done over the years, and I think she is a very deserving person of the promotion that she has just gotten. Madam President, as we welcome Ms. Claxton to her new role, I think it is important that we note that her appointment is testimony to the continued commitment of this government to promote young people, to promote young women to serve at the highest level. I think it's very important, Madam President, to note that this government is committed to giving young people opportunity. This government is committed to gender equity. We are committed to giving women opportunities, Madam President. And so I want to again congratulate Ms. Claxton, and I want to wish Mr. Barrett all the best in his new role. Madam President, and you know, we have some additional persons, Madam President, within the ministry and the department who have transitioned to retirement, and I want to wish them all the very best. Mrs. Avril Elliott from the Department of Education, Mr. Shefton Liburd also from the Department of Education, Mrs. Jasmine Doe, the immediate past principal of the Charlestown Secondary School, Miss Norlene Smithen, the immediate past principal of the St. Thomas's Primary School. I want to wish them all the very best in their future endeavors. We also had some persons within the ministry who have gotten transfers, have been placed in different places within the ministry. We have some persons who are leading some of our schools who have now been asked to take up different roles. Mrs. Shea Wilkin, who is the immediate past principal of the VOJN Primary, she is now assigned to the Nevis Public Library as librarian. Miss Danielle Wallace, the immediate past principal of the St. James Primary School, she is now assigned to the Department of Education as the educational coordinator for UE. We also have Miss Felicia Walters, who is the immediate past deputy principal of the Gingerland Secondary School, who has resigned. Madam President, since we have people leaving positions, then naturally we would have people coming into these positions. So I want to single out those who have been appointed to their new roles as principals. We have Mrs. Nicola Huggins Paris, who is now the principal of the Charlestown Secondary School. We have Miss Diana Brown, who has been appointed the deputy principal of the Charlestown Secondary School. We have Miss Chrislyn Jeffers, who is now the principal of the VOJN Primary School. We have Miss Catherine Seabrooks, who is now the principal of the St. James Primary School. We have Mrs. Jerose Walters, who is now the principal of the St. Thomas's Primary School. And we have Mrs. Dion Hanley, who has been reassigned as the deputy principal of the Gingerland Secondary School. I think everybody who I spoke about are women. So again, Madam President, yes, all of them. Again, Madam President, this is a government that is promoting women, Madam President. And so I'm very, very happy to say this, Madam President. Madam President, my ministry is a very large ministry, and I don't propose to detail everything that we have done over the past year. I think we try our best to put things out there on YouTube, put things out there in social media. We try to utilize NTV a lot to get things that we're doing out there. So I would just want to, this afternoon, highlight a few things. If I try to speak about everything, Madam President, then, I would exhaust all of the time, and then I still would be asking for more. Because we do a lot of things in education, in sports, in youth, IT. We do quite a lot of things. Education itself, you have stuff happening at the department level, and you have quite a lot of things happening at every single school around the island, from early childhood all the way up to sixth form. So I'm only going to pick out a few of the things, Madam President. I will say, Madam President, that education is probably the most important thing in a country. See, Madam President, if you imagine a small nation, vibrant with culture, but facing limited resources, how does that nation compete in a globalized world? And the answer is through education. Education is the most potent weapon that we have against poverty, against violence, against all of those things. Because the more knowledge that young people have, the better decisions that they are going to make, Madam President. And it is through education that we can lift ourselves as a nation to become that model small island state that people like to talk about so much. It is through education that we can do all of these things. And this government certainly takes education very, very seriously. Madam President, while I'm talking about taking education seriously, this is graduation season for our secondary schools, and I think it's very important that I highlight some of the persons who have done really, really well at graduations. Over the past few weeks, I've been to all of the graduations. I went to NISS graduation a few weeks ago. I went to the graduation at Gingerland Secondary School, I think that was last week. And just on Tuesday, we had the graduation for the Charlestown Secondary School. That was in the morning. I caught a little piece of it, but then I had to leave to come here to the house. And then the Nevis Sixth Form College, they had their graduation in the afternoon. And so, Madam President, being at these graduations, you get to see a lot of things and you get to hear a lot of things. Graduation is a feel-good time. So at NISS, Madam President, I'm happy to announce that NISS, of all the subjects that the students at NISS did, they had a 92.3% pass rate for 2023, Madam President. That's extremely good. That means that the subjects that the students sat, that they passed almost all of their subjects. So for their graduation, we had Mr. Mayor Daswani, who had 8 subjects with 3 grade 1s. We had Mr. Dylan Theron, and he was the valedictorian. He had 7 subject passes with 5 grade 1s. And we had Miss Dejanel Truss, who had 4 subject passes with 4 grade 1s, Madam President. So everything she did, she got grade 1s, Madam President. At the Charlestown Secondary School, Charlestown Secondary is a huge school, our biggest school here on Nevis. They had an overall passing rate of 84%, Madam President. 84% passing rate. And at Charlestown Secondary School, Madam President, we had 1 student getting 11 subjects. That's Mr. Jaden Liburd, who had 11 subjects with 5 grade 1 passes. We had 3 students getting 10 subject passes, Madam President. We had Aidan Liburd with 10 subject passes and 8 distinctions, and I think he was a salutatorian. We had Jaron Webb with 10 subject passes with 7 distinctions. We had Lachelle Herbert with 10 subject passes and 7 distinctions. We had Imogen Archibald with 9 subject passes and 8 distinctions, and I believe she was the valedictorian, Madam President. Overall, Madam President, we had 11 students at the Charlestown Secondary School with 9 subject passes. That's incredible. Madam President, we continue. We had an additional 11 students, Madam President, with 8 subject passes. And then we had 13 students, Madam President, with 7 subject passes. And then an additional 9 students with 6 subject passes. If my math is correct, that's 48 students achieving 6 subject passes or more, Madam President. 48 students. At the Gingerland Secondary School, Madam President, Gingerland Secondary School had an overall percent pass rate of 84.7%. And I'm happy that the member for Nevis 3 is back in the house because we're talking about Gingerland. 84.7% pass rate, Madam President. At Gingerland, we had one student who passed 10 subjects. That's Ayana Brown. We also had an additional 7 students, Madam President, who passed 9 subjects. Let me speak about the valedictorian first. The valedictorian was at the Gingerland Secondary School, Miss Chanel Evelyn, who had Shanae. Correction. Shanae Evelyn, who had 9 subject passes with 6 grade 1s. And we had the salutatorian, Mr. Udell Wisdom, who passed 9 subjects with 4 distinctions. And, you know, I recall being at the graduation, and the member for Nevis 3 was there. And the mom for the salutatorian, a very nice lady from Rollins, we were there and we were talking and we said, you know, today is your day. We're very, very happy for you. And, you know, that lady said something and a kind of chill came over me, Madam President, because these students, they work hard, you know, and some of these parents, they don't have a lot, but they invest all that they have into their children. And this mother, what she said, Madam President, was, I am so proud today because my son has come from nothing to something. Madam President, these are the reasons why it's easy to get up to come to work every morning. This is why it's easy to get up to come to work, because we know that we are doing a good work for the young people, Madam President. I tell you, a chill came over me, and it's coming over me again right now, just speaking about it. To hear that mother say, I have it here. To hear that mother say how proud she is of her son. He has come from nothing and has made something of himself and has made all of his family proud. And we can see that all around the landscape of Nevis. I continue at Gingerland Secondary, 7 students with 9 subjects. With 8 subjects, we have 3 students, 5 students with 7 subjects, 11 students with 6 subjects. So at the Gingerland Secondary School, Madam President, we had 27 students who passed 6 subjects or better. Now, Madam President, I'm a little bit older than you. Some people like to tell me I'm young. But I remember as a youngster growing up, you used to hear about Tom or you used to hear about Dick or Harry, who were bright people back in the day. And they used to have 4 subjects. You understand, Madam President? And everybody used to say, so-and-so is a bright person, or so-and-so is a bright person because they went to school. In those days, Madam President, school, I think you had to go to town to get to high school and so on. There was no high school in Gingerland. But people used to say, if you got 4 subjects and 5 subjects, you're bright people. And Madam President, 27 and 48, I can't really do the maths here, but 27 and 48 is a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. I'm getting the help from behind here. That's what we do. We help each other. 75 students, Madam President, with 6 subjects, or greater. We have a lot of bright young people in Nevis, Madam President, and we should celebrate them. On to the Nevis Sixth Form College now, because that graduation was on Tuesday. And I was at the graduation. I sat next to the member for Nevis 1 and his lovely wife. And we were there, and as we listened to the students coming up to get their awards and their prizes, I looked over at the member for Nevis 1. And at the same time, I was looking over to the member for Nevis 1. The member for Nevis 1 was looking over at me. And why was this the case? Madam President, you see, we had, let me make sure I get it right, and I work with the program for this one. We had 53 young persons graduating from the Nevis Sixth Form College, Madam President. 53. That is remarkable, but even more remarkable than that, Madam President, is that out of the 53, 50 students were receiving the Premier's Award. 50 receiving the Premier's Award for passing 6 CAPE units or more. I made the comment to the member for Nevis 1, and I said, well, boss, if the Premier is putting a little money in that Premier's Award, then the Premier is going to be broke. If the Premier puts a little money into that Premier's Award, he's going to be broke right now. So if you all see the Premier walking around the street during the Christmas season, you all give him a little handout. He needs it because his 6 farmers, they have taken it away from him. And I'm very, very happy for that, Madam President. That warmed my heart being at that graduation. Madam President, let me single out from the Nevis Sixth Form College, the valedictorian, Miss Jakelia Barrett. Do I have the pronunciation correct, Mr. Barrett? What's the pronunciation? Jakelia. Miss Jakelia Barrett. And she gave a brilliant valedictory speech. We have some really, really brilliant young people around. And the salutatorian, Miss Sarai Archibald. I think both of them are from the same area, the Quadic Road area. You can't claim this one member for Nevis Street. Claim it Nevis 1. Madam President, Madam President, these are the things that we come out to work for. This makes everybody feel good. 50 out of 53 graduates receiving the Premier's Award. Let me continue with education, Madam President. Every day there's something happening in the Department of Education. I want to talk about the Black History Month elocution contest. I think that was a wonderful event. The theme was Calypso culture. I think the students recited a song, Calypso song. We chose a song and they recited it. In the individual round, the winner was the Charlestown Secondary School, represented by Kajni Keynes. So she was the winner of the individual rounds. You know, and these names are so difficult to pronounce nowadays. I used to thought that I had a name that was hard to pronounce, but these young people are now beating me. Madam President, in the group choral speaking round, the winners were the St. Thomas's Primary School. And overall, the winner was the Charlestown Primary School, St. Thomas's placed second, and the VOJN Primary School, they placed third. Madam President, in the high school section, Charlestown Secondary School won, and they were represented by Rondre Daniel. Madam President, the annual Interscholastic Spelling Bee, sponsored by the Lornette Mills Charitable Fund in collaboration with the Nevis Association of South Florida and HarperCollins Publishers. This took place in May. In the primary competition, the Ivor Walters Primary School came out the winners. The Nevis Academy placed second, and the Elizabeth Pemberton Primary School were third. The best speller was Shrivala, oh my, Shrivala Adu. And I tell you about these names, Madam President. In the first federal, in May, Madam President, we had our first ever STEM Expo. STEM, of course, is science, technology, engineering, and math. And we've spoken before about going into a lot of STEM activities. So in May, we had our first ever STEM Expo and our STEM Challenge, which was sponsored by First Federal Credit Union. The STEM Expo overall was sponsored by the Embassy of the Republic of China on Taiwan. So for the STEM Challenge, the winners in the primary competition were the Ivor Walters Primary School. The St. Thomas's Primary placed second, and the Maud Cross Preparatory School placed third. In the secondary competition, the Charlestown Secondary School was first, and the Gingerland Primary School was second. For the STEM Expo competition, the Gingerland Secondary School placed first, the St. Thomas's Primary School placed second, and the Joycelyn Liburd Primary School placed third. And while we're on STEM, Madam President, just in September, a group from the ministry was able to take a learning trip to Estonia. I think the Premier would have spoken about it in the budget. This team was led by now Permanent Secretary Zanella Claxton, also Mr. Jevon Claxton, the Deputy Director of IT, and Mr. John Williams from the Department of Education, and they were accompanied by Minister Councillor Elsa Wilkin Ambrister from our diplomatic corps. And they went to Estonia on a fact-finding mission. They went to see what places like Estonia are doing in terms of integrating STEM, integrating IT into their schools, and not just into their schools, but into their government and into their society as a whole. We got a whole report from the team that went, and I think it was an eye-opening experience. When they came back, they did a presentation for us, and some of the things that they're doing in Estonia, the things are just remarkable. And so we will be looking to partner with Estonia to bring some of those things here to Nevis, Madam President. So we are very, very happy, Madam President, to incorporate as much technology as we can into our education system, Madam President. I think I would have said earlier in the year that the ministry was the recipient of a generous donation of 250 tablets from the Winsong Foundation. These tablets are already in use in our schools, and in 2024, Madam President, we will see the further rollout of these tablets in our schools. One of the things that our team learned when they went to Estonia is the way that Estonia is deploying their devices in their schools and in terms of the society in general. So we will be trying to mirror some of what we learned from what Estonia is doing. You see, Madam President, places like Estonia, they are the world leaders in what we call e-government. Everything that they do, they have their e-pass and all of those type of things. Everything that they do is technology driven. And so they would have started down that road of technology and computerizing everything since the 90s. So they have years and years of trial and error. And we are going to be the beneficiaries of learning from all that they have done, Madam President. So in 2024, we will continue to roll out the use of these devices. Also, Madam President, I think just this week, we were able to take delivery of a shipment of devices. These would be laptops and tablets from a project that we would have started as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This project was called the Continuity of Learning Project. This is a project that we embarked on in conjunction with the federal government. So it is a Sink It's Nevis project. And we have just received some devices from this project. Some devices are for the use of the children, and some of the devices are for the use of the staff in the schools, Madam President. So this is something that when COVID hit, we knew what our shortcomings were, and so we started to plan. So this is the fruits of the things that we did when COVID came, coming to bear now, Madam President. We were able to think quickly, and we were able to get going on things. So here now in 2023, we see the fruits of that labor coming. Madam President, talk a little bit about the Gulf Insurance Bank of Nevis International Limited Primary Schools Championships, or the Mini Olympics, as we would say here in Nevis. And I want to welcome the Bank of Nevis International and thank them for their generous sponsorship. We are happy to partner with them, Madam President. And of course, we also thank Gulf, our long-standing sponsors. They have been with us from the very beginning, and we look forward to continuing with them, Madam President. This year, Madam President, for the first time, the meet was a gold medal-based meet. And from all of the reviews, I think everybody are now happy with the fact that we have moved from the traditional points scoring system to the gold medal system. I think it's less confusion at the end of the day to go to the gold medal system. And so it's working well. All of the schools are happy with it, and so we will continue to push forward with it. From the inter-primary championships for this year, Madam President, we saw the Charlestown Primary School coming out on top. The St. Thomas's Primary School was second, and the Joycelyn Liburd Primary School, they would have placed third, Madam President. Talk a bit about primary school cricket. The TDC sponsored Winarko Morton Nevis Primary Schools Championships, and I'm kind of jumping ahead into sports, because this cricket and the inter-primary, they are a partnership between education and sports. So I'm going a little bit back and forth here, because I think it was a good thing to marry education and sports, because so many of the things that they do overlap. So the cricket tournament, of course, a partnership between education and sports. The winners of that tournament were the VOJN Primary School, and in second place we had the Charlestown Primary School, Madam President. Sticking on the theme of being in both education and sports, I want to move now to the Nevis Primary Schools Football Championships. And you know that I didn't name a sponsor up front, so let me take the opportunity to say that we are looking for a title sponsor. So I'm speaking to all of the good corporate entities out there in Nevis and in the Federation that we're looking for a sponsor for the primary school football championships. And Madam President, this one was just concluded, I think, last weekend. And leading up to the conclusion of the football, there was a little bit of controversy, a little bit of but I think we got all of it sorted out, and we ended up having a wonderful, wonderful tournament. We had a wonderful final four, third and fourth place game, and first place and second place game on Saturday night. And I must say, Madam President, that with the exception of inter-primary and probably maybe parade of troops, the park was extremely full, Madam President. So I'm very, very happy that football is on the rise here in Nevis. And of course, as I said, this is a partnership between sports and education. The fourth place team was the St. James Primary. The Joyce and Liburd Primary was the third place team. In second place, we had the St. Thomas's Primary School, and the winners, the Charlestown Primary School. And Madam President, I must tell you that if you weren't at the game, don't miss the football final next year. This year we had a nail-biter. The game came down to penalty kicks, and I had people next to me pulling, literally pulling on my shirt, how nervous they were at the end of the game. It means that the public is now invested in the football, and that's important. It's always good that the young people, that the children see that the public, that the adults are out there to support them. And Madam President, on this one, I want to single out a few people for some commendation. Of course, we have the Director of Sports, who is in the gallery, Mr. Jamir Claxton. But there are some young persons who I want to single them out on this. Miss Nicola Fraser, Mr. Algen Newton, Mr. Kimball Ward. Of course, they would have had a lot of support to bring the tournament together, but they were the ones at the forefront doing the planning. And not just that, Madam President. You see, it's good to give young people opportunities, because I've been around the Ministry of Education for quite some time now, and I'll tell you that before now, primary school football happened. It happened, and it was over, and that was it. You didn't hear anything about it. There wasn't any vibe. There wasn't anything big about it. But that's not the case now. And the reason for this, Madam President, is because we brought some young people on board, and we told them, you go out and run this thing. And they made some subtle changes. Before time, the football used to happen at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and so on. People didn't have time to, people at work, they couldn't come out and enjoy the game. And so the suggestion came from these young persons, why not switch the game to a little bit later in the afternoon so that parents and supporters could get to come to the games. We did that, and it has been a revelation, Madam President. The park was full. You can go on Facebook, you can look at all of the pictures, and all of some of the student athletes have come up to me and they have told me, I'm celebrity. That's what they're saying. Because they see their pictures on Facebook, they're seeing themselves on the internet, on the live stream, and they feel good. So they're telling me that they are now superstars because that opportunity has been given to them. And so I want to say kudos to those young people for bringing fresh ideas to the fore. And that's why it's always important, Madam President, to empower young people, because they come with new ideas and new innovative thinking. So it's not just the same old all the time. So, Madam President, we've already transitioned into sports. And the outlook for sports on Nevis is very positive. Very, very positive one, Madam President. Of course, cricket, football, track and field, netball, basketball, tennis, swimming. I didn't even know swimming was a big thing in Nevis. We are surrounded by water, but I didn't know swimming was such a big thing. Recently, we had something at the swimming center there at Wally, and the turnout was, I did not know, Madam President, so much people into swimming. I feel bad about it and all. I won't say the reason why, but, but Madam President, I feel a little bad about it. But nonetheless, maybe next year when I come back to talk, I can feel good talking about swimming, because I hear they have accommodations for people like me. So, Madam President, early in the year, we were happy to support an initiative by the Nevis Cricket Association. They held a dinner in honor of the 50th anniversary of Mr. Elcomido Willett becoming the first person from the Leeward Islands to make the West Indies team. And the ministry, of course, was delighted to assist to the tune of some $50,000. And that dinner took place sometime in March, Madam President. I was there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful dinner. And we look forward, Madam President, to partnering with the Nevis Cricket Association going forward. I think there is a camp that is being worked on right now as we speak. There's supposed to be a camp that's going to happen over the Christmas vacation. And of course, we are partnering with the Nevis Cricket Association to assist as much as we can. Madam President, the ministry has been providing a lot of support over the year for all sports. Football, we of course assist our football teams from Nevis who are participating in the Premiership League and in the First Division League that are primarily based over on St. Kitts, with the SKN Football Association being the main driver behind that. But we have been supporting our teams to participate. So much so, Madam President, that some of the boat fees and so on that the ministry has been paying, it's been a significant sum, Madam President. For this year, 2023 alone, so far we have already exceeded over $100,000 in support to our sports teams going over to St. Kitts. That's a significant contribution, Madam President, by the Ministry of Sports to our young people in Nevis who are interested in playing football. Madam President, I am delighted, however, to say that this year we were able to host Premiership and Division I games right here on Nevis for the first time in a really, really long time. We were able to host games on Nevis. So our teams, they were able to play their home games at the Nevis Athletic Stadium, what we call the Mondo Track, Madam President. And, you know, I'm smiling when I'm saying this, because the reason why we were able to play these games, we were able to facilitate these games in Nevis, Madam President, is because sometime early up in the year, we constructed a little building at the Mondo Track to facilitate this very same thing. So, Madam President, while yesterday morning I was here in the house, somewhere between falling asleep and trying to stay awake, trying to pay attention, I heard the member opposite say that, oh, we're wasting money, and we built this VIP at the Mondo Track with no plans, just because we wanted to give some of our friends some work, Madam President. That is what I heard somewhere halfway between sleep and wake, fighting to stay awake, you know, trying to listen to what somebody WhatsApp me and refer to as an extempo Madam President. An extempore freestyle, that's where you get up with no plan and you just start to talk. And so you go around and around and around and around. Extempore, Madam President. And somewhere between doing that, what we heard was that somehow we decided to build a VIP at the Mondo track with no plan, hurriedly, because we wanted to give some friends some work. And Madam President, I will be plain and tell you that I take exception to that. Because, Madam President, the plan was there. You know what was at the Mondo track before that? And let me roll back to the beginning. I know that time is of the essence, but this one is worthy of note. It's worth it for me to say this. Because at the Mondo track, when it was completed, the very first time we wanted to have inter-primary there, the track was just finished, but it was only the track. We needed to hold inter-primary, so we needed a few little places for NTV to set up, for the radio stations to set up, for all of the media people to set up. So we built some little huts back then. The weather sort of did its work on them because those were done hurriedly. Those were done quickly to facilitate inter-primary at the time, Madam President. Some of them had been blown over by storms, and so we had to do something to replace them. And so, Madam President, what we did was we thought about what we needed to do. We knew that we needed to have some place to house all of these media people and so on, but we knew we wanted football too. So we knew we needed the dressing rooms and so on. For football, I remember consulting the director of sports and the deputy director of sports and so on. And the director already spoke about this on the radio, you know, and he was very eloquent in speaking about it. So to come into the house now and to hear somebody come into the house to try to cast aspersions on this, I felt really bad about it. And so, Madam President, it was built with a plan, and it is the same building that is now facilitating the playing of football over there. Madam President, I don't know if you have gone to watch any of the matches, but the matches are exciting. I think I have gone to somewhere around 10 matches over there. Over the summer, there were matches almost every week. Almost every week we were hosting matches. Football, well, not we, but the Football Association was hosting games at the Mondo track. And that was made possible because we built the building that they refer to as a VIP. And there was no excessive expenditure, Madam President. There was not any excessive expenditure at all on that building, in getting that building done, Madam President, built for the benefit of the young people. And you know, I want to say something too, because part of what was said is that maybe we wanted to give some work to some friends. And I take exception to that. So because a contractor from Rollins gets a job, it's a problem. A job for about 80,000. And got to hire about 10 guys to get the work done. That's a problem. Because a plumber from Brownhill gets a job. That is a problem. Because an electrician from Bath gets a job. That is a problem. A job that's worth maybe about 15,000, 20,000. That's a big problem. There's something sinister about that. Madam President, when the bigwigs and the fat cats and the consultants are getting their jobs and they're charging 100,000+, oh no, there's no problem there. There's nothing sinister there. Those are our fees. You understand? And our fees should be respected. But whenever, Madam President, it is the poor people, Whenever it is the poor people who are supposed to be getting a little job, it is a big problem. And the poor people, they got to hire people to do the work. They got to work out there and toil in the sun, Madam President. And you know what? They got to pay their taxes. They got to pay social security for those who work in for them. But it's a big problem whenever the poor people have to get a little job. And that's one of the reasons why I believe, people got to listen when they hear people talking. That's why, Madam President, the people of Nevis know that they're safe. They're in safe hands with the Concerned Citizens Movement, because we are always looking out for the smaller man. We don't believe that the smaller man should just come to us with a handout and say, well, please give me this and please give me that. We believe in empowering people. That is what we are about. So when the small contractor from Rollins, or the small electrician from Bath, or the small plumber from Brownhill, or wherever across Nevis they are from, get a job, it's not anything sinister. It is that we are looking to empower our people. And if anybody has a problem with that, Madam President, well then that's their problem. I'm not going to worry about that. But I think that it was worthy of note. Also worthy of note, Madam President, is that the member opposite, should have had more time, coming at lunchtime. Madam President, also worthy of note, is that the member opposite was reading from the auditor's report. And me personally, I found that very amusing, Madam President, especially when you consider that for the years that the NRP spent in government, the 5 years and the 18 null and void months, that they did not produce a single solitary audited report. Not one, Madam President. Not one did they produce, Madam President. And so I find it really laughable, Madam President, that the member opposite could feel justified to smile and open the audited report, to read from the audited report that this CCM government, we ensure that every year we produce, Madam President. You want to talk about hypocrisy? That is it right there. And Madam President, you know the thing about it, when you're going to cast aspersions, you should cast them good, because maybe when you read the audited report, you don't read all. So I went to look to see what the audited report said when it comes to the area that I was looking at, because I understand that we're trying to give jobs just because we want to give them to a friend. So I went to look and I checked page 30, which speaks about education under the recurrent budget. On page 30, Madam President. And you know what it says about Ministry of Education, Library Services, yada, yada, yada? The Ministry of Education and Library Services incurred 26.5 million in actual expenditure for the year 2022, which provided a net savings of 1.66 million from the budgeted amount. When compared to the previous financial year, the ministry incurred 24.5 million from its budget of 27.39 million. In the 2 years, the ministry has realized slight savings each year, from 2.89 million in 2021 to 1.66 million in 2022. Madam President, that means we were within the budget, Madam President. And if you go to page 34, which speaks about the capital budget, Madam President, reading again from the audited report commissioned by this CCM government, it says the Ministry of Education had a budget of, from its budget allocation of 5.5 million, the Ministry of Education incurred a total of 4.06 million in projects, such as upgrade and refurbishment of schools, school meals program, computerization of schools, and TVET enhancement. That again, Madam President. So we had 5.5 million budgeted, and we spent 4.06. Again, Madam President, there was no wastage, according to the audited report. So, I mean, before you come to cast aspersions, and especially on poor people, if you're going to quote from the audited report, then go through the whole thing, read everything for us. Let us know, well, how we actually did. So, Madam President, I took real exception to that. And I think that the people of Nevis should also take exception to the fact that whenever poor people supposed to get anything, that is a problem for some people. You see, some people believe that poor people don't have money. Poor people can't count money. So if they get a little job, it got to be something sinister about it. It got to be somebody else's job, because those poor people, they don't have more money. You see, but when the bigwigs and the fat cats and the consultants and all of those type of people, they won't go out in the sun. You see them with the umbrella, and if they have to go out somewhere, they got on their nice shoes and they step in because they don't want to go in the mud. But when they charge their money, it's their fee. And when it's twice as much or 3 times as much, there's no problem with it. You know why? Because they understand money. And I think poor people need to listen carefully when they hear people talking, Madam President. I continue. Madam President, sports, well, let me talk about netball, because just recently we had a St. Kitts Nevis netball team that went to Antigua. They did very well in a tournament. Shortly after that, they came back and they went to St. Martin and they won that whole tournament. And netball is looking up in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the Ministry of Sports is happy, Madam President, to partner with netball, Madam President. We continue to invest in our young people. And just in October, Madam President, we were able to collaborate with SKN Athletics to facilitate a training session for coaches in the Federation, both St. Kitts and Nevis. There was one day on St. Kitts and another day over here on Nevis for the training sessions. And the facilitator for this training session was the world-renowned coach, Glenn Mills. And Madam President, you know who Glenn Mills is? Glenn Mills, Madam President, is the former coach of the great sprinter Usain Bolt, world record holder in the 100 meter, world record holder in the 200 meter. Caribbean man, Jamaican, and a great man. Glenn Mills, Madam President, also coached St. Kitts and Nevis' very own treasure, Kim Collins, for a while, Madam President. And so we were able to partner with SKN Athletics to bring Glenn Mills here for a 2-day workshop with our coaches, Madam President. We are trying to invest in our young people, Madam President, and we have gone for the very best. We're not settling for less. So we have brought Glenn Mills. I had conversations with Mr. Mills, and Mr. Mills has said that he would be happy to come back, and he would be happy to offer any advice that he can to our coaches and so on, Madam President. So these are the ways that we are trying to help to improve the level of coaching, the level of teaching that we have for our young athletes, Madam President. So we continue to push forward. So that, I think, was a wonderful initiative, Madam President. I think this year the Department of Sports also had a 2020 cricket tournament, right? Women's 2020 cricket tournament. First time ever, right? First time ever hosted by the Department of Sports. Women's cricket, Madam President. So we continue to invest. I'm going to jump off of sports just now because I want to make time. But before I come off of sports, let me end on a positive note on sports. And I want to thank Mr. Carl Claxton of Reliable Motors and Claxton Services for a generous donation that he gave to the ministry recently, Madam President. Mr. Claxton would have donated 100 hurdles, Madam President. So we were very, very delighted to take delivery of those hurdles, Madam President. And so I want to thank Mr. Claxton, certainly from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the ministry and on behalf of the entire government for his tangible contribution to the young people of Nevis. And I want to encourage other corporate citizens out there to take, a page out of the book of Mr. Claxton. Make Mr. Claxton a model and come forward and donate to the young people, to the future of the young people. You see, the future of the young people is the future of the country. So again, thanks to Mr. Claxton for that tangible donation that he made. Madam President, on to the Department of Youth. Department of Youth is small, but they're very powerful, Madam President. And each year they do a lot of things around Nevis. I want to talk about the Easter camp that they hosted this past Easter. They had over 100 children at the Easter camp. It was a wonderful camp. I popped in for a few days, a few times to talk to the young people. They had many creative activities for the young people, field trips all around Nevis to historical places and so on. They taught the young people how to do tie-dye, with the shirts and so on. And, one of the things that I really, really liked about it, I'm a little bit partial, is that there was a kite-making workshop for our young people. And each and every one of those children was able to get a kite. We engaged some persons from the community to come in for 2 days to teach the young people how to make kites. And then at the end of the 2 days, all of the children went to the Mondo track again, and they were able to fly their kites there. And so I felt very, very good. We had a fun day there. I felt very good seeing those children flying the kites that they made, and I'm hopeful that going forward that they will stick with it. And, kite making in Nevis is a really, really good thing. Another big initiative for the Department of Youth, of course, is the Youth Impact 12 Award. And this year, I think we honored 9 students. But from this Youth Impact 12 that is done at the Department of Youth, the awardees, they have the opportunity to get some sponsorship to put on different programs, Madam President. And one of the programs that has come out of it is a girls mentoring program, and it's called Girls Can Play Football. It's an initiative that they go to the Bath playing field on Saturday mornings, and they have the young ladies there engaging in football and other life lessons. There's also another wonderful initiative called Lessons with Class, where they're inviting young people and they teach them proper etiquette, how to eat, how to set the table and eat with a knife and fork and all of those things. Good old-fashioned mannerisms, Madam President. So that's another initiative of the Department of Youth. Also, last month in November, the Department of Youth partnered with the United Nations and Premier's Ministry to host what they call a mega youth summit. And that was under the theme, Youth of the Future. What can we do to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals? I know the member opposite would love that because she's an environmentalist. So the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the good things about this is that they invited all of the ministers. So we were able to go there and sit with the youths and share with the youths. We were all there except for the youngest minister. Who, she was off island, of course, on other government work, but I think she still, registers with the youth. But the rest of us who are more elderly, we were there to sit with the youth and to speak with them and to share some knowledge. Senior. So, Madam President, another initiative is being a part of the 25 Most Remarkable Teens initiative. And just this year, we had 5 persons from Nevis being honored as part of the 25 Most Remarkable Teens. 6? Oh, I only have 5 names here, so then I will be very careful and not mention the names, Madam President. So I'll move on from that. We also had the World Poetry Day, poetry writing competition. And this again is another initiative where we saw partnership. It was the Department of Youth partnering with the Nevis Public Library, and I think partnership is the name of the game. Also, Madam President, we have the Summer Job Attachment Program, SJAB, as it is called. SJAP, sorry, as it is called. And that is another wonderful initiative. I was at the opening ceremony and I popped in a bit for the for that initiative, and they basically teach the young people how to do their resumes, and they have professional training and development workshops with them. Another wonderful initiative. Okay. So the 6 names for the most remarkable teens. We have Kalia Huggins Simmons in academics and leadership, Tiana Williams, spiritual commitment, Jaden Liburd, academics and volunteerism, Maya Dashwani, academics, Dylan Theron, academics, and Brianny Chapman in leadership and volunteerism. I think it's important that we recognize them, Madam President. And so thank you, member for Nevis 3. My list would have omitted one of the names, and that would have been a tragedy. Madam President, moving on to the Nevis Public Library, and oddly enough, the longest list of things that I have here is from the library. So the library would have had the Black History Month exhibition, and this exhibition was dubbed The Father, Son, and the Offsprings, the history of cricket on Nevis, Madam President. The library continues to partner with Education USA to provide classes for the SAT exams, preparation classes for the SAT exams. Of course, I spoke about World Poetry Day just a while ago under youth. Of course, we had a competition that was a partnership between the library and the Department of Youth. Of course, the annual summer library program, normally when our schools go off for the summer, parents need to have some place for their children to go to keep them occupied, and the library summer program is one such place. I'm always happy to be a part of that. That is some place that I went as a youngster. I can still remember my days at the library summer program. We used to go all over Nevis. We used to learn the most amazing things. Some of the things that I know about Nevis historically, I learned them at these library summer programs. So we continue with the library summer programs, and we had over 100 participants this year. Madam President, the library also had an independence display which highlighted the the history of the Nevis Symphonic Band. And for those who don't know, the Symphonic Band, that's the band that plays when we have our Independence Parade and when we have our Remembrance Day Parade and so on. So they highlighted the 40-year existence of the Nevis Symphonic Band. Also, Madam President, the library continues with our after-school programs, and of course, we also have our biannual craft program that they are continuing with, Madam President. So moving a bit forward to information technology, because I'm trying to get us to lunchtime, I'm being urged. Madam President, the government recognizes the importance of information technology. I don't think I need to belabor the point about information technology being important. That is where the world is heading now. Everybody is trying to incorporate as much information technology as possible into the things that they are doing. So we've put internet in our schools, and we're trying to, as we say, deploy more devices in a very useful way in our schools to enhance the educational delivery. And so all of these are being facilitated, Madam President, through information technology. Of course, we continue to run fiber all around the island of Nevis, and that's the information technology department doing that. Of course, Madam President, you would be aware, and we all would be aware, that in January of this year, that the NIA would have been the victim of a targeted malicious cyber attack that happened January 27th. Madam President, I'm very happy to report that the good folks at IT, that we were able to restore, all of our services, and our IT infrastructure is a lot more robust now than it was before. And so I want to say kudos to the director, David, and the rest of the staff at the IT department. They have been doing very, very good work, Madam President. I won't get into all the details about how we have made the system more robust, but just know, Madam President, that we have been taking this very, very seriously, and we have done quite a lot. We have secured our emails. We have now gone to using the Microsoft platform. Before, we use a platform where we house our emails in-house, but now we have gone to use a more robust and a more secure mechanism for dealing with our emails, Madam President. While I'm on that, somebody sent me an article that one of the pundits put out, they like to put out on Facebook, because there is a local person who is here in Nevis who would have suffered a similar cyber attack. And oddly enough, one of the papers that was recovered from that cyber attack, here we have a pundit going out on Facebook and trying to make politics out of this same article. So we have to be very careful, Madam President, Well, I don't really want to cast aspersions, but, I mean, you have a cyber attack, and then all of a sudden you have some papers coming out, and papers getting into the hands of certain people, and they're now using it on Facebook to talk about, the government and what the government is doing and so on. So we have to be very, very careful around here. I thought it was important that I noted that, Madam President. But, of course, we have done our best to make the system as robust as possible, and we will continue, Madam President, to move with the trend of technology and to incorporate as much technology as we can, Madam President. Madam President, close to the end, right? I just want to make some general comments, just about another 5 minutes, hopefully. And I started off by saying, Madam President, that in the years that CCM has been here at the helm of government in Nevis, that we have grown the economy in Nevis. We have heard those on the other side, Madam President, try to put out this narrative that, oh, nothing is happening in Nevis. But, Madam President, we all live here, and we all know that that is nothing but fake news, and that is a false narrative. And I don't think the people of Nevis have been gravitating toward that narrative, Madam President, because a lot has been happening for the people of Nevis. We put Nevis first. I started off by saying that over the past 3 years, under this present government, we have given 15% salary increase. And I pointed out that in the years before that, certainly since CCM has been in here, there was another 10%. 10% plus increments. Mm-hmm. And so, Madam President, if we were not able to grow the economy and we were not able to move Nevis forward, well, how are we then able to pay these salaries? How are we then able to continue to keep the island running? Because some people have short memories, but I don't really have a short memory, you know, Madam President, because I recall shortly before CCM got in, that the then permanent secretary in finance would have made a statement, and he said that after paying salaries, there was hardly any money to do anything else. In fact, he said that the country was broke, Madam President. And I think it was the premier at the time who then came on and tried to save face, and he said, oh, the country is not broke. The country is not broke. That was a very famous thing. People had it taped, and they were playing it over and over and over again. Madam President, our salaries have increased a whopping 25% plus from those days until now. And we continue to keep the ship of state going on an even keel, Madam President. So if we had not been performing, we would not be able to do that, Madam President. So it's clear to see, Madam President, that under this government, we have been doing good things. I want to support the member for Nevis on one thing. I think this is very important because he spoke about the water rates, you know, and I wanted to give him a little bit of support because over the years from 2013 until now, a significant amount of money, Madam President, has gone into the upgrade of our water systems here on Nevis. When we got into government in 2013, a large amount of our main pipes were still, what you call them? Cast iron pipes, Madam President. And you know the problems they're having now in the Virgin Islands with cast iron pipes. So it was this government, Madam President, who replaced all of those old pipes, Madam President. We did a project, the CDB water project, that installed pipes, new mains, all around the island of Nevis, Madam President. And those would have come at significant cost to the government. I think we had a loan with the Caribbean Development Bank, Madam President. CDB water project, they called it at the time. I think there's still work being done on that. The member for number 1 would have spoken about all of the pipes that they had been laying. And in spite of all of this, Madam President, the increase in water that was spoken about, $13 per thousand, right? For the average man, they're not going to be having any increase at all. No increase at all, because the increase only kicks in after you have used 2,000 gallons. And after you've used 2,000 gallons, between 2,000 and 4,000 gallons, it only goes up to $18 per 1,000 gallons, Madam President. Madam President, one of these costs $1. And this is how much? One of these costs about $1. $5? Oh, Lord. Sorry. I shop wholesale. I shop wholesale. When you go out, Madam President, one of these costs $5. And this is only 16.9 ounces, Madam President. So imagine that water department is providing a whole 1,000 gallons for $13. Madam President, the water is cheap. What we are trying to do, Madam President, is to get people to conserve, to get people to not turn on the shower and stay on the phone for half an hour before you go into the shower, and then take an additional half an hour in the shower. We are asking people to be prudent, Madam President. So if people are prudent, then we wouldn't have any problem. They wouldn't be feeling any increase at all. And I know the member for Nevis 4 would be happy with that, because when she started her discourse, she spoke a lot about climate change and climate action and the value of the natural environment. I think she said we should budget more, towards climate change, Madam President. But that's something to talk about another time. I have a lot of things that I wanted to say about climate change, but I'm going to wrap up, Madam President. I want to thank you for the time, and I want to thank everybody who came to listen. Of course, my colleagues on this side for the support, Madam President, and I want to reserve my opportunity to speak on the adjournment. So let me just take the opportunity to wish this bill safe passage through this honorable House. May it please you, Madam President.